On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to this webinar on testing best and worst practices. I'm Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, we have delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services to companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I'm the author of 12 books on software testing, including the bestseller, Managing the Testing Process, and 4 books on the ISTQB program. We are presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. Check out their website, www.softwaretestpro.com. Attendance at today's webinar earns PMI PDUs for those of you who need them. Thanks to Murali Gathula for reviewing the materials for PDU status and making valuable suggestions. Attendees will receive an email telling them how to claim the PDUs, including the PDU code. PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Before we start the presentation, a couple housekeeping notes. Feel free to submit questions at any time via your webinar interface, but I will only look at the questions and answer them at the end. There is no need to ask for presentation copies, though someone surely will. The presentation is on the web. Go to rbcs-us.com, navigate to the Resources tab in the upper middle of the page, and from there go to the Basic Library. And by attending this webinar, you have automatically been registered for the next free e-learning drawing. So check your email over the next few days. Watch the spam filter. You could be the lucky winner. I hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for profit company. So last month, in the first installation of this discussion about best and worst practices for testing, looked over a dozen or so best and worst practices. So we'll look at another dozen or so in this part and wind down with some final thoughts. Now, for those of you who might have missed the first part, just to make sure that this term best practice is clear, this is, I believe, the dictionary.com definition or something like that. Best practice can be called a method that generally shows better results than other methods. So notice it's saying better results, and generally, it's not saying this is the perfect way of doing things, nor is it saying that it's always the right way to do things. It's a general rule. It says, do things this way. Typically, things will turn out better, but use your brain. Don't just, I always do things this way and guarantee that everything will work out fine. No, you got to be aware of situations where best practices can have exceptions and so forth. But the fact that there are exceptions doesn't mean that something's not a best practice. Some people try to disprove this by going, well, if I can find a single exception where a best practice doesn't work perfectly, then that means it's not a best practice. And then people run around and go, oh, there's no such thing as best practices. No, that's just silly. Basically, that's applying the scientific way of thinking about things rather than a management way of thinking about things. In science, if you find a single exception to a rule, that disproves the rule. But in management, it's not about science. It's not a search for truth. It's basically saying, well, I need to know how things generally work, and that hence the need for best practices. Okay, so let's start looking at these. So the first one here is assume that you are going to find bugs. Plan to find bugs. Don't ever plan testing based on the assumption that you won't find bugs. top of this slide, memorable quote from a project manager on a project that I worked on. We're at the beginning of testing period and starting to catch, put together the system. And I'm thinking, this is not looking good. Component testing results, as meager as the component testing had been, were not positive. And I told the project manager, I have a bad feeling. He said, oh, no, this is going to be great. We're going to catch a break in system test. Everything will be fine. No, we didn't. No, what happened was that there was an explosion of bugs, and it basically killed the project. we caught a break, but more along the lines of a broken leg rather than a lucky break. And I've seen this on a number of other projects where people think, oh, well, we're not going to find that many bugs, or, in some cases, we won't find any bugs. And I had a project manager tell me, oh, well, the way this is going to work is you're going to find all the bugs in the first pass of testing, and then we're going to fix them all. We're going to give you another release. Then that will be perfect, and we'll ship that. I'm like, okay, well, that could happen. There's no law that says that can't happen. That's not necessarily impossible, but I've never seen that happen before. And of course, that's not what happened. So ideally, here's the best practice. You have access to historical metrics from past projects that are reasonably reliable, and you have some way of looking at the sizing of past projects, and you're able to estimate how many bugs you're going to find, as well as estimate how long it's going to take you to find those bugs and how long it will take for those bugs to be fixed. And then you can have a realistic plan for how long the test execution is going to take. All too often, it's, oh, well, there won't be that many bugs. Everything's going to be fine. Optimism runs amok, and chaos ensues. Now, on that note of bugs, bugs are basically a record of mistakes that have been made, a bug report. And I had a guy once say that his company slogan was "Make interesting new mistakes." That was their rule. He said he couldn't take any words out of that without. We wanted to make it as short as possible. You couldn't take any words out of that without destroying the meaning. He said, you have to make mistakes because, if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. But you shouldn't make stupid mistakes. You should make interesting ones that provide learning opportunities, and they should be new mistakes. Don't make the same mistake twice. So why not apply this idea to bug reports? Really shouldn't be a dramatic suggestion of, hey, why don't we look at defects that have been introduced, figure out what kind of mistakes are the developers making? How could we teach them not to make such mistakes? How could we reduce the number of defects that were being introduced? Look at the defects that are found in production. How could we have found that earlier during testing? What can we learn from the defects that have been found in production? Unfortunately, some organizations don't do that. And there have been a lot of good ideas that have come out of agile and lean methodologies, but one of the bad ideas that's come out of it is that some organizations are like, well, we don't need to track defects that are found during the sprints. We only track them if they're found and not fixed in the sprint. Well, okay, you can do that from a purely tactical point of view. I suppose if you keep track of the thing is resolved somehow or another, you're not reporting them in bug reports, but how are you going to study them? You've got learning opportunities there that are being lost because you don't have historical information of the kind of mistakes that are being made. So track your bugs, use good bug classification practices, and over time, look at the patterns in the bugs and figure out how to introduce less of them and catch them earlier. Okay, very important best practice here. Remember that testing is something that's done to satisfy other people. It is not you. It's not to satisfy you. It's not about you. It's about other people. Testing is a service. Testing is providing a service to the software development team and to the project. And so you need to be focusing on what other people want, not what you want. I always laugh when I see these posts on Twitter and so forth. People are going to go, testing is about this, testing is about that. Really? Who says? You? But you're a tester. Why are you saying? The people who should be saying what testing is all about are the people that you're doing the testing for, and people who are actually paying for it. So, do you know who your stakeholders are? Can you write them down right now? Who are the people you're doing the testing for? Who are the people that have a direct or indirect interest in testing, the test results, and or the quality of the product? If you don't know who those people are, then it's a real safe bet that you are not satisfying them. If you do know who those people are, have you ever had a conversation with them about what they are looking to get out of testing and what they want in terms of quality? And that can be a very, very eye-opening conversation when you have it. Like, oh, yeah, well, just make sure the product's perfect before we ship. Yep, lots of luck with that. You won't be satisfying that stakeholder, will you? So then you need to have a conversation of, here's what I can actually do, what I can actually contribute to move us towards these objectives. And you can set up some metrics for how effectively and efficiently you're carrying those things out and achieving those objectives, actually quantify what success means. And all too often, this is squishy, it's vague, it's unreal, and people have unrealistic expectations. When those unrealistic expectations aren't met, guess what? Testing is seen as a failure. Testing is blamed for things that it couldn't possibly have resolved or prevented or caught. So don't try to define for yourself what you should be doing and whether you're successful or not. Work with your stakeholders, understand what they want you to do, understand and define in a realistic way what would actually constitute success. Now, requirements are great. Requirement specifications are great, unless they're not. But suppose that you're getting good requirements, or you think you're getting reasonably good requirements, or you're on an agile project and you've got user stories and you're thinking, okay, well, that's good. That's what I need. And I make sure I test all that. If I've tested that, that's all covered, I'm done. No, bad idea. Requirements are never complete. Requirements are never going to be a perfect embodiment of what the software should do, the software shouldn't do, problems it should solve, problems it should not create. It just won't. So you can cover 100% of the requirements, but if you think that means that there's nothing else to test, then your thinking about what you should be covering is too limited. What other dimensions of coverage should you consider? Well, one example, quality risks. If you're doing risk-based testing, identify risks to the quality of the system, make sure that you've covered those. How about different supported configurations? The good old days when everybody's desktop device was locked down and everyone had the same exact configuration. Well, no more. For the most part, people are accessing with different devices, different browsers, different operating systems. So think about those different configurations that are out there. Have you identified all of them? Have you populated those in your test labs? We've had a situation once where we're having our website built by this company, which we would not use again. And when they tested it, the only thing that they used was Firefox. I was like, guys, Firefox, that's great. I'm glad it works on Firefox. But guess what? Most people are using IE. People also use Safari. People also use Opera. There are Chrome. There are other browsers out there, and you need to be testing with those. Well, if it works on Firefox, no, wrong. So think about the different support configurations. Your user personas. How do people use it? Now, this has to do with permissions to some extent, but it's not just about that. It's not just about who's got permission to do what. It's also about how do people interact with software and systems. Some people are more patient. Some people are less patient. Some people, if the system doesn't respond immediately, they click again a few dozen times, right? So think about the different ways that people interact with your systems, the different personalities they have, the different permissions that they have. Make sure you've covered those. Different data types. If your system processes various kinds of data, it might be very worthwhile to identify those different data types and make sure that those are all being properly handled. So think creatively about dimensions of test coverage. I actually did a webinar on this last year, I think. And the webinar is recorded and posted in the digital library. So if you want to, if this is kind of making you go, I really need to spend more time thinking about this. We really just need some more food for thought. Go out to the RBCS website, go to the digital library, take a listen. This will fuel your thinking about what you should be covering. But this, the 10,000 foot view, to use the cliche, is that you need to think about multiple dimensions of test coverage, not just one, and make sure that you're covering those things adequately. And even if you are covering those things adequately, remember that that doesn't mean that you've tested everything, even if you do that, because there are an infinite number of tests that you could run, and your coverage in terms of the percentage of tests that you could run is always effectively going to be 0%. So remain humble in your thinking about how much have I covered. Cover all the important dimensions for sure, but remember that testing, you'll never cover everything, and you'll never be a perfect shield against defects. It can only be a filter. Now, outsourcing. People do a lot of outsourcing testing. I forget the number. It's a fairly significant percentage of the money spent on testing, something like 40%, I think. I'm remembering properly. I forget the exact number. Something like that is outsourced testing. So there's a lot of money spent on outsourced testing. But many times people don't do it very well. So one of the things that happens is the outsourced firm assigns people to the project, and those people get re-signed or those people quit. And the way that this happens without the clients necessarily knowing about it is that the clients don't always insist on named resources. So they don't even know. So you get these turnover issues happening, loss of intellectual capital. The new testers, of course, need to ramp up. So your effective headcount is never the same as your actual headcount. So you're basically paying for work you're not getting. And even the work that you are getting, how good is it? Well, shockingly large outsourced contracts are done without clear ways of measuring what would constitute success, what's acceptable versus unacceptable performance. So make sure that when you're putting contracts in place for outsourced testing, that you have clawbacks in the contracts for turnover. So you have named resources, you know who these people are. My recommendation, most of my clients don't do this, but my recommendation is that you have the right to interview testers before they are assigned to your project, and the right to actually say, no, that person cannot be assigned to my project. And watch out for those. It's the switcheroo trick. I've had multiple clients tell me that they've done interviews of people and they are convinced, phone interviews, and they're convinced that the person that they talk to is not the person who was ultimately assigned. So be careful with that. Make sure that you have these clawbacks so that if somebody leaves, they have the outsourcing company basically has to pay to ramp them up. This gives the outsourcing company a strong incentive to prevent turnover. Make measurement of turnover part of the contract. Have clearly defined success criteria with clearly defined effectiveness and efficiency measures. Watch out for that. Some of these organizations, these outsourcing organizations, are exceptionally good at gaming those metrics or at making sure that you put metrics in place so that they know how to game or how to score well on. So it can be a real, nailing jello to the wall exercise, but it needs to be done properly because otherwise, the measure of effectiveness and efficiency, unfortunately, is going to be primarily how well the engagement manager on the vendor side entertains the decision makers on the client side. And that might sound cynical, but I've heard plenty of stories of golf trips and steak dinners and other kinds of inducements to convince people on the client side that everything is peachy. And the reality is that the vendor is taking the client to the cleaners. Now, I mentioned before that testing is not perfect. You can't find everything, but you certainly can be more effective or less effective. And one of the ways to be more effective is to have a strongly skilled team. In DeMarco and Lister's book, Peopleware, which is a very useful book for managers of all stripes, including test managers. They cite this statistic where they say that the difference between the most effective person and the least effective person in all of the different ways that they figured out how to measure it is a factor of 10. So, 10 times better, the more effective person. And that the more effective person is 2.5, the most effective person is 2.5 times better than the average. So if you're like, oh, well, I got a team and they're reasonably competent, they're about average. Well, you could be 2.5 times better by trying to move each of those people towards their potential. Now, you're never quite going to get there because what would constitute the perfect test team is a moving target. As technologies evolve, as applications evolve, as the user base changes, the skills that are needed will continue to change. So you have to keep track of that. What I usually recommend to clients is that they do a task analysis, come up with a critical skills list, and plan to update that critical skills list at least once a year. And every 6 months, some people do this quarterly, but I'd say at least every 6 months, go through and measure your team against the skills and see where your gaps are. And figure out what to do to fill in those gaps, those weaknesses. Train somebody, cross-training, figure out ways of addressing the skills gaps. And remember that a skill isn't really acquired and solid until somebody's actually used it. So just saying, well, we're going to send somebody out and train, they're going to be our expert on skill X. Well, no, because they need to actually have an opportunity to put that skill into use when they get back from the training. So make sure you keep that in mind too. Don't just say, we have people, when people go through training and they have these skills. Don't be surprised if somebody went through training a year ago and didn't do anything with the particular skill they were supposed to pick up, if you then assign them a task that requires that skill, don't be surprised where they really don't have the skill. Now, keep in mind that the skills that you need will vary, and your needs as a test manager will be different than other test managers' needs. I ran into a situation about a year ago where I'm looking at these tester job descriptions. And I'm looking at them closely, and I'm like, why is there a U in that word? Isn't that supposed to be a Z, not an S? Finally figure out, oh, I see. So this is in Canadian English. And the company's in the United States. I'm like, why is the job description written in Canadian English? Oh, well, surprise, surprise, right? It's downloaded off the internet, and a little, editing done on it. And there's nothing wrong with going out to the internet to get some ideas of, what job description should be. But your needs will be different than other people's needs. That'll be the case. So if you're just assuming, well, anybody's job description, be perfectly fine. No, you need to be more creative than that. You need to be more analytical about, in my particular organization, for this particular project, for the products that we test, what do we need? What kind of skills do we need? The other thing that I see is like the junior programmer job description. So it's clear that somebody just took the job description that the development team uses, and then they're like going, oh, okay, well, we'll just modify that. Take a few years experience out of it. Like, oh, really? No, not a junior programmer. Or the junior business analyst is the other one that I've seen. It's, take the business analyst job description, cut a few years of experience out of it. No, you're missing some important dimensions of skills there. So again, go back to the skills analysis that I talked about a minute ago. Make sure you've done that. You know what the skills are. Generate your job descriptions out of that. Sure, no problem going out to the internet, looking at other people's job descriptions as a source of ideas, but don't just grab one and go, oh, well, it'll work for them. It should work for us. It might not even be working for them. And if it is working for them, that still doesn't mean it will necessarily work for you. Now, there is a management rule of thumb which says, I like you often means I am like you. In other words, that we as human beings tend to look for people who are similar to us in various ways and prefer them. And, there's psychological, evolutionary reasons why that would make sense going way, way, way back. But, of course, it's pretty dysfunctional at this point. So you have to make sure that you're going to counteract that, right? Don't hire people that are basically the same as the people you've already got on the team. This is where that skills analysis will come in useful again, because you know where your gaps and your weaknesses are, right? So, yeah, you can train people. And another way to fill a gap is hire somebody who is strong where your team is weak. This is what I call hiring into weaknesses. Figure out where your team is weak, hire people that have strengths in those areas, and then to the extent that those skills need to be diffused across your team, then use cross-training to handle that skills diffusion. This doesn't have to be very elaborate. Doesn't have to be expensive. It's a great practice that I saw a client have recently was that they once a week would have these, I think they call them tech lunches, where basically people would, somebody would give a presentation on some particular skill. The one that I saw had to do with database optimization. and designing good tables and queries and so forth to make sure that the product was quick. And, for the cost of 3 boxes of pizza, these guys had a great knowledge transfer program going in their organization. So there are lots of different ways of going about this, but it's important that you do bring in people that are going to bring new skills and capabilities into your team rather than people who are just like the people already in your team. Now, the macho geek culture. Very evil macho geek culture. This is the overtime for overtime's sake. I'm a great guy. I'm a great resource because I worked on Saturday, or I worked on Saturday and Sunday, and isn't that wonderful? And I'm a team player. Sort of celebration of pointless sacrifices. Now, sometimes overtime has to happen. I've worked plenty of 60, 70-hour weeks in my life. I've worked plenty of Saturdays and Sundays. But you only want to do that if it's actually solving a problem. And you only want to do it when it happens infrequently enough that it's not going to be a burnout machine. The line, one of DeMarco's book about extended overtime being a productivity reduction technique, I think is accurate. Eventually people will get burnt out. They'll get sick of it. I have one guy that worked for me, and he would do 40 hours of work no matter how many hours he was there. If you made him be there longer than 40 hours, he would just screw around. He'd be, on the internet. He'd just be doing other stuff. He felt like, look, I get paid for 40 hours. You want to make me warm a chair longer than that? Okay, I want to keep the job, so I'm not going to refuse, but I'm also not going to do anything. And I've run into that multiple times. So if you're a manager, make sure that you use the sacrifices sparingly. Don't ask people to sacrifice their free time and their weekends for worthless exercises. And, if you're asking people to work overtime, if you're asking people to work weekends, then you should be there too. The absolute worst practice, and I've seen this with some managers, is they give the raw team speech and make sure, that people are going to show up on the weekends or work long hours and so forth. And then it's like the weekend comes around, where are they? Well, not there. Now, what if you think that pointless sacrifices are being pushed down on your team from above, and you can't do anything about it? Well, I don't know, maybe you can. So this situation once where one of the senior VP level guys was complaining about, the testers aren't working very hard. And, when I come in at 6:30 in the morning, nobody's in the test lab. And when I leave at 9:30 at night, nobody's in the test lab. And I'm here on the weekends and nobody's testing. So he's just thumping his chest about this. Now, I went to my client contact, and we were running this. I was running the test team for him with a number of contractors, and I went to the client contact. I said, we're getting all this pressure to do these long, ridiculous hours, and it's kind of stupid because we've already found more bugs than the developers can fix. We have a bug backlog problem already. So throwing more test hours at the software at this point, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's just going to cost you a bunch of money. But I said, I don't think that that's going to be a very productive conversation, though, if I go to the VP and explain, pedaling faster on the test bike at this point isn't going to move the project forward because we're so far out ahead of the development team that, you guys can't keep up. It was just going to be, defensive and so forth. And the client contact agreed, said, yeah, doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. Doesn't make a lot of sense to have that conversation. I said, well, here's what I would suggest. We'll split the team up, and we'll have a day shift and a night shift. I've got enough people on the team that would be probably perfectly happy to work a night shift if they got paid for like a couple extra hours to take the undesirable shift. And the same thing, we'll have a Saturday and a Sunday shift. People will get paid extra to do that, and then they don't have to work, one day during the week for one weekend day, so they make some extra money. So testing's always happening. It's be the same amount of testing that's currently happening. It just looks like testing is happening, like more testing is happening because it's spread out over a longer period of time. And, it costs you a little bit more, not anywhere near as much more as telling everybody they have to work 60-hour weeks to no effect. And it also will be cheaper than the kind of attrition problems that I would have if I were trying to force people to work 60-hour weeks and people were losing people when I'm bringing people on. The client contact said, yeah, fine, go ahead, do it. So we did that, and the grumbling stopped because, sure enough, testing was happening all the time. The VP didn't know any of the testers, or really care about any of the testers enough to come upstairs and look around and realize, oh, well, it's exactly the same amount of testing is happening. So it's okay to do a little make-believe and fake it if you need to protect your team. Personally, I think that's completely legit. Now, here's a worst practice. Thinking about your bugs. So I've had a number of testers talk about my bugs. My bugs. I find bugs, they're my bugs. I want to make sure my bugs get fixed. It's important that my bugs get fixed. Well, I mean, if a bug is anybody's, I guess you could say it's the developer's because the developer created it. You found it as a tester, but you didn't create it. So it really isn't your bug. It's the developer's bug. The developer probably doesn't like his bug or her bug, right? The developer wants his or her bug to go away too, probably, right? Or you could say, well, this is a collective effort, so it's the project's bug. It's not the tester's bug. It's not the developer's bug. Yeah. So really this idea of, it's my bug. It's important that my bugs get fixed. Is a problem. And as a consultant, when I hear people talking about that, well, my bugs get fixed. It's important that my bugs get fixed. I think, okay, there's a problem here. Now, yes, you should be quality oriented, right? And I expect testers to care about quality. That's part of what we do. But, don't get ego involved. If you find a problem, you report it, you give people the information they need to make a decision, and they decide we're not going to fix that because it's not important enough. Okay, that's okay. That could be a perfectly legitimate business decision. Now, hopefully that decision is being made in some sort of cross-functional way. The appropriate stakeholders are involved. In some cases, the volume of bugs might be such that not every bug gets escalated to this bug triage committee or bug management committee or bug management team, whatever it's called. Some of the more obvious ones might go straight to the developer. Yes, this has to be fixed. But certainly you don't want a situation where there's a narrow set of perspectives being used to make the deferral decisions. And you would want, as a test manager or as a senior tester, to have input into that decision making, and that's great. But don't get too hooked on this, my bugs have to get fixed. My personal worth is, what percentage of my bugs get fixed. I've seen managers make this mistake too of having annual performance evaluation goals of, how many of a particular tester's bugs get fixed, how many get deferred, and so forth. And, any time that happens, of course, that's going to result in some pretty significant distortions of behavior. I had a conversation with a test manager once, and I asked him what he thought constituted a well-written test case. And he said, well, if I can take a test case and written test case and give it to a shaved gorilla, and the shaved gorilla can run the test, then that's a well-written test case. So I said, well, how many shaved gorillas do you have on your team? And he said, well, none. And I said, then why are you doing that? Why do you feel the need to document it to that level of detail? And he didn't really have an answer to that. Now, there could be perfectly good reasons to have that level of documentation. Say you're working on safety critical systems, you're subject to audits, you have to be able to convince auditors that adequate testing has been done. Sure, then you might very well need to have the Shaped Gorilla documentation. But if you are just writing extensive test documentation, particularly if you're following a particular set of templates, the IEEE 829 are especially dangerous this way. You might be over documenting. And in some cases, we actually see situations where testers are both over documenting and under documenting. So there will be enormous differences from one tester to the next between the degree of detail that is put into the written test cases. And that's generally because there isn't guidance being given to the testers. So make sure that people are given guidance. Here's how much documentation we need. This is the kind of documentation that needs to be in the test cases. This is the kind that you can leave out. This is what you can assume people will know. This is what you can't assume. In the absence of that, it's a pretty safe bet that your team will be both over-documenting and under-documenting the test cases. Okay, so that winds down our trip through 24 or so testing best and worst practices, general ideas for making your testing better, trying to make yourself more successful and avoiding situations that will hold you back. Where did this list come from? Well, my head, right? I mean, it's just things that I've observed over years and years of working on test projects and being a consultant and so forth. Are there other testing best and worst practices? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not holding this out as the conclusive, end all be all comprehensive list of best and worst practices, but these are ones that crop up quite a bit. So hopefully thinking about these patterns will be something that can help you improve your testing practices. If you're an individual tester, try to do more of the best practices and avoid the worst practices. And if you're a test manager, look at these best and worst practices and how they apply and don't apply to your team, and figure out how to put that to work for you. All right, so I'll put the advertisement up here and get the questions up. Oops. Sorry, I was grappling with Citrix UI here. All right, so Tom says, "Hi Rex, great presentation. Can you recommend a resource where I can find just enough documentation guidelines?" Oh, well, I think I discussed this in managing the testing process. There'll be one place where you could look at it. Another resource would be Advanced Software Testing Volume 2. I think I discussed that issue there. So those would be places to work or places to look. So I'd recommend those. Griffin says, "Well done." Thanks for that, Griffin. Thanks for listening. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Trying to find some question here. Okay. Alex asks, should user personas be considered under usability testing? Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could think of it as a part of usability testing, and I think that would be I think that'd be an appropriate place to put it. Just be careful that you don't say user personas are part of usability testing Usability testing is someone else's job. Therefore, I don't have to worry about user personas. The user persona stuff that I talked about, I mean, this is going to affect the way that functionality works, right? So it is good to have testers that are doing basic functional testing to be aware of this issue of user personas and trying to represent the different user personas while they're doing functional testing, and not just say, oh, that's usability testing, that's off in their bailiwick, therefore I don't have to cover it. Let's see. Griffin says plus 10 regarding documented to the shaved gorilla level of detail. Yeah, it's you certainly see a lot of that. If in doubt, write it down. Well, no, if in doubt, clarify the doubt, right? Figure out what actually needs to be written down, because it's not just a matter of writing it down. It can be a matter of maintaining it too. Let's see. So Ivana asks, what test practice strategy do you recommend for solutions with customization? For example, SAP, EDMS. Can business consultants replace testers for such systems? Well, okay. So the more specialized the user skills required for an application, the more important having those skills in your test team becomes. That's probably a really, really obvious thing to say, but it's sometimes obvious things need to be said because they're not always attended to. So can you use business consultants, business analysts, et cetera, as a resource to bring that skill into your test team? Yeah, you can. The thing that you have to remember is that people that get slotted into test teams temporarily or get assigned testing roles in addition to their other duties are not going to be motivated to acquire the technical skills and the testing skills that a well-rounded tester would have. So a well-rounded tester would have an understanding of technology, they'd have understanding of testing best practices and testing techniques and so forth. And a person that's just going to be a tester for 6 months or a year or 3 months or whatever, they're not going to be motivated to get those skills. And in fact, they might be demotivated because they might not like the fact that they were assigned to do testing work. So you have to have the proper testing skills in the team to kind of make up for that. If you're going to bring in people, I mean, I refer to this as the amateur tester problem. Now, amateur, people think amateur, oh, you're insulting people and calling them amateurs. No, I'm just pointing out the reality that amateur is the opposite of professional, right? A professional is somebody who makes a living doing a particular thing, and an amateur is somebody who does it, because they're interested in it. And certainly, business analysts, business users, and so forth have an interest in the quality of the product and an interest in it being tested adequately, but they're not going to have an interest in acquiring the level of testing skills that a professional would have. And so you just have to keep that in mind. Let's throw a bunch of users at the software and see what they come up with, and that's going to be our approach for doing testing. Don't be surprised when that's not done very well. The bug reports coming out are very poor. The coverage is very limited. Things that particular cadre of people cared about got tested and other stuff didn't, etc. And Griffin says, nice point regarding both over and under documenting being likely to occur at the same time. Yep. If you don't know where the target is, the shots are likely to go all over the place. Um, Amy asks, what are good testing strategies for interviewing testers? Have you found giving tests to work well, or what other techniques work to see how they are as a tester? I actually did an entire webinar on this, on interviewing testers. It was not the last one, because the last one was part one of this, but I think it was the one before that. So what I would recommend is that you go out to the digital library and give that a listen. It'll give you some ideas on interviewing techniques. Certainly one of my favorite techniques is what's referred to as an audition interview. And that's where you actually have someone do the kind of work that they're going to be doing and evaluate them. So, give people, if they're going to be testers, give them a written test case, written to the appropriate level of detail, and set them down in front of the system and have them run some or all of the test case. Now, ideally, it's a test case that is going to find a bug, at least one bug that you know about, and say, well, if you find a bug, write a bug report. That way you get to evaluate, can they run the test? Can they follow instructions? They write a decent bug report. We've used that technique a number of times and actually had situations where people who were doing reasonably well on the interview totally bomb out when we give them the test and we have them run the test, and they come back and go, oh, no, there aren't any bugs. It's a test pass. Like, really? Okay. Thanks for trying. But yeah, I'd say go take a listen to that interviewing testers webinar that I did. Now I'll give you a whole bunch of ideas on what will work and what won't. Let's see. So Yuri says, I can see the recorded podcast, and he gives the link. It's on rbcs-us.com, software-testing-resources/podcast. Can I find the PowerPoint slides on your site? Yes, the PowerPoint slides are at, go to the resources tab on the homepage on rbcs-us.com. Go to the resources tab. That's going to cause a menu to drop down. From there, you want to navigate to the basic library, and you'll be able to find the PDF versions of the PowerPoint slides there. Kathleen says, do you have a slide, basically a single slide, displaying a list of all the best/worst practices you discussed throughout both presentations? That's a great idea. But no, I didn't do that. I'm sorry. It would be easy enough to collate that just by going back and looking at the 2 slide presentations and gathering that list. But I did not do that. So sorry about that. If anybody's motivated to do it, feel free. This basically originally started as a series of tweets because I got annoyed at some of the there are no best practices stuff going around on Twitter, and I decided, well, and there are best practices and worst practices, and allow me to illustrate. And I fired off a best and or worst practice a day for about a month. And then I decided later, that might make kind of a decent webinar or two. And so I went back and collected them. But no, I never did a summary slide or overview slide. But anybody's motivated to do that and wants to circulate it, go right ahead. Deb says, are the slides for both part 1 and 2 available someplace? Yes, they're as I said, on the basic library. Beth asks, what was the name of the book you recommended? Something like Peopleware. Yep, that is the name of the book, Peopleware. Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister. Excellent book. Basically anything by either of those guys is a worthwhile read. So Griffin asks, what pattern of mistaken best practices do you see people with less than 5 years experience get into? I think probably one of the more prevalent misunderstandings among junior people is the if I cover all the requirements, I have tested the system completely. That worst practice of considering only a single dimension of coverage. I would say that is the one that I would suspect most strongly with junior people. It's that, the illusion of, I've got this list of things that the system is supposed to do called the requirements, and as long as I make sure that every one of those things has been checked, then what could possibly go wrong? I'd say that's probably the most prevalent one of the worst practices that I would see with junior people. Not to say that the others don't occur as well, but that's the one that's like just really the most glaring. Divya asked, is static testing useful when compared to tools doing dynamic testing? So static testing referring to reviews and static code analysis. Yes, absolutely. Very useful. Just simple things like if somebody's going to create a document that it should pass spell and grammar check before it's circulated for review. Establishing some coding standards, having the programmers use static analysis tools to verify that everybody's adhering to the coding standards, doing requirements reviews, design reviews, code reviews, test reviews, and so forth. All of these are things that are very useful. Remember that the more bugs that go into a testing process, the more bugs will come out of it, right? So you can have a very, very effective test process that finds 95% of the defects. But if the software that you receive contains 1,000 defects, then you're going to have 50 defects going out. Whereas that same team, same level of effectiveness, they get software that contains 100 defects, they're only going to have 5 going out. So, yeah, get it right. Apply multiple defect filtration processes throughout the entire life cycle, and you'll be happy later. Let's see. Bruce asks, can you give specific metrics to measure outsourcing companies to minimize the gaming of the statistics? Well, the trick with minimizing gaming is to come up with a balanced set of metrics. Balanced in the sense that anything that would be done to game one or more of the metrics would necessarily push down or retard the other metrics. So it would be difficult for me to rattle off the top of my head what would be an adequate set of metrics. The last time I did a project with a client like this where we were coming up with the metrics for their outsourcing vendor, I think we had probably about, I want to say about 20, but I think a lot of those were they were calculations based on a related set of raw numbers. So it was less work than 20 would suggest, but there were like 20 different ways the numbers were being calculated, and they were coming from a rich enough set of metrics that it would be very difficult for it to be gamed. So just, think balance, think offsetting, think when you're putting the metrics together, and you're setting the targets, sit back and think a while and go, okay, what could be done to game this metric, to make this metric look better than it actually is? And then go, okay, how would that behavior play out with the other metrics? And if there's one or more other metrics that would catch that and reveal that gaming happening, then you have balance. If there's not, then you need to add one. Let's see. So Rodrigo says, thanks, Rex. Very informative and interesting. I am part of a team where a group of testers are used to appear to sacrifice in order to get paid extra time. Since we work with many offshore teams, sometimes this is used as a pretext where it's difficult to actually track if the resource actually did any testing. If you were the manager, how would you handle it? Yeah. So, I mean, this is an example of what I was talking about. Of you've got you're throwing a lot of hours at things, and in part, it sounds like people are throwing hours at things, regardless of whether anything actually gets done, just because the hours are billable, and so they want to be able to bill for that time. To say that that's not in the client's best interest is, of course, an understatement. But you have to be careful about if you're on the vendor side of that relationship. Of course, you can't be the one pointing that out, or you have to be very careful about how you point that out. You go within your team and say, really, we're not doing the client a service here, but you have to be very careful with that. Excuse me. If you're on the client side of that relationship, then you need to have efficiency metrics in place so you're able to measure that. And, you'll see when that kind of behavior goes on of just pointless overtime, pointless weekend work, then what's going to happen is the efficiency metrics are going to go down. And, that will point that out, and you're able to say, we shouldn't be doing this. This is not actually working out. But, yeah, try to do it with data and do it with political finesse. Srilata said, you said about the past webinar about interview questions. Do you have something for the initial phone interview? Yes, sure. That webinar discusses the whole phone interview process and the kind of questions that you ask, and similar kinds of things. Obviously, the audition interview is not something that can be done via the phone screening, but there are, skills-related questions you can ask, experience-related questions, behavioral questions, and so forth. Let's see. Leone says, just so I'm clear on user personas, they could potentially capture security requirements in addition to usability requirements, right? So assuming personas are just usability could potentially cause you to miss some requirements. That's a good point. Yes, there are some aspects, where you have role-based access and role-based security and so forth, where depending on what persona somebody has, it changes what they're able to do, and you want to make sure that gets adequately tested. So that's yet another reason to not just go, oh, well, this is just about usability, because it's not just about usability. And again, functional behaviors will differ sometimes. So, from one persona to the next. Now, part of that is because of security, but it can be due to other reasons too. So, you want to make sure that you're adequately addressing those personas and testing those personas in the right places. Donald says, I understand not linking evaluation or self-esteem to how many of a tester's bugs get fixed, but is there any concern if few or relatively few of a tester's found bugs get fixed or slated to be fixed? Okay, so we take the extreme case where pretty much everything a tester finds, say 90%, 80% of the defects that the tester finds are unimportant. Is that a concern? Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing you want to avoid doing in such situations is assuming automatically that this is a tester skill / attitude / competence issue. Give you an example of that. Did a assessment for a client that was involved in building systems that were pretty specialized. They were industrial control systems used to run things like oil refineries and pharmaceutical plants, stuff like that. And they had a problem where a large percentage of the defects that were being reported were being rejected as non-defects. Okay, so the working theory held by most of the people, including people in test management, was that this was related to this high rate of bug rejection was related to the amount of experience, user experience, what they call plant experience, actually using the systems that the testers had. And then the more senior testers would tend to have a lower rate of rejected defect reports because they would be able to recognize what was a real problem versus a more junior tester who would see something and go, oh, that's a problem, and it's actually correct behavior. Very reasonable sounding theory. Everybody believed it because it sounded reasonable. Of course, the only problem with it was completely wrong. And the way I was able to show that it was wrong was I got the test manager to give me a list. I said, just give me the number of years of plant experience that each tester has. Tester by tester. I don't need their names. I just need the number of years experience. And then with that, show me the percentage of that tester's bugs that are rejected, bug reports. Took that list, 2 numbers, did a scatter plot on it. Boom, no correlation at all. 0.1 R squared value or something like that. It was just shotgun blast. So here's this idea that people had, which was, lack of experience causes the bug reports to be rejected. It's completely disproven by the numbers, right? So make sure that if you see issues with a high rate of rejected defect reports, deferred defect reports, so forth, that you actually dig into why is that happening. People like to have simple answers and obvious answers, and as the quote from H.L. Mencken goes, for every complicated question, there is an answer that is simple, obvious, and wrong. So be careful that you're not going for simple, obvious, and wrong. Michael asks, when hiring for weaknesses, how do you appropriately interview? That is, know what you don't know. Well, this is where the task analysis comes in. So what you have to do is you have to do a task analysis. What does my team actually do? And then look at that and say, all right, is that actually a comprehensive list, or is that what my team does just because that's all they're capable of doing? It's the stuff that we should be doing that we're not because we don't have the skills. So then you want to create that. You want to augment this critical skills list or critical tasks list with all the tasks that you would be doing if you had the appropriate skills to do them. And then you go through and for each of those tasks, you identify the skills that would be required to carry out that task competently. And that's where you do your team analysis, right? You identify your gaps in your team. And then when you're going to interview and you're looking to hire into the weaknesses, you look specifically to, how do I hire people that have skills in these areas where we are currently weak? Let's see. Levi says, as always, Rex, thanks for another insightful webinar. Will there be a part 3? Side note, our entire QA team is listening in on this webinar. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Part 3, I don't know. I might get inspired, come up with some more best and worst practices. Maybe next year we will follow up to it, but I don't know. There's lots of things to cover. At some point you get to the diminishing returns thing, right? But it was fun. And I might if I get inspired to fire off another set of a dozen or so best and worst practices, I might make a webinar out of it. Ivana asks, where can be found recommendations on how to test migration? Okay, so I assume we're talking about migrating from one application to another and one version to another. That's not a topic that has been real thoroughly discussed in any articles or books that I've read. There might be, and probably are, various web resources out there the trouble with stuff you read on the internet is, free advice is often worth exactly what you pay for it. You could get some bad ideas. So, certainly research it, but be careful. Don't just go, oh, I read this article by this guy who claimed that he, had done all these migration projects and been the test manager, and therefore he knows everything. And, well, maybe they have 10 years experience, but it might have just been 1 year's experience 10 times in a row. So do be careful on that. Srilata says, thanks. This was a very interesting and learning webinar. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Kathleen says, do these rules also apply to the testing of an implementation of COTS, or commercial off-the-shelf software? What would be the goal of COTS testing? Well, yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, these best and worst practices can apply to testing in pretty much any situation. Now, with COTS software, what you're generally doing is testing how well it had been implemented in the production environment and customizations and connected to other interoperating systems and so forth. So usually to the extent that you're testing the application, it should just be acceptance testing of it. You're not like, hey, I'm going to try to find a bunch of defects in this COTS software, unless the objective is to ascertain whether it should be rejected, in which case then you definitely would. But now COTS, I've certainly been involved in plenty of projects where we're using COTS software, and I've worked with a number of clients that use COTS software. So yeah, these general ideas still apply. Griffin says, Deming red bead experiment. People need to get that experience. Yes. Okay. So if you're not familiar with this, go out, do a web search for Deming red bead experiment, and give it a look. The experiment is to demonstrate that when the people doing the work are not in control of the means by which the work is done, the tools that are being used, the process that's being followed, it is nonsensical to hold them accountable for the results that are obtained. That is a very abbreviated version of that. Go take a look at it on the internet. It's really very, very valuable. As obvious as it is, this is a mistake that happens over and over again. As a consultant, I see tons of situations where people have in their annual performance evaluations measures that at best they have fairly weak control over, and it's very counterproductive, very demotivating. This is the classic metrics worst practice is mistaking a process metric for a people metric, and then attaching rewards and punishments to that metric. And I've seen it over and over and over again, and it is just if you want meaningless metrics, that's the way to do it. Okay, so oops. So somebody says, please just say anonymous for my name. The current question hits close to home. I no longer bother creating bugs that I find because my managers close them out in order to make the metrics look good to their superiors. They have put this in writing to me. It has nothing to do with my ability to find valuable bugs. Essentially, they want all bugs to be customer-found bugs. I went through some anger about this at first, but since this is the route management has chosen to go, I have accepted this situation, although I do not like it. what to say. The again, to the Menkins thing of, every question has an answer that is simple, obvious, and wrong. The simple and obvious thing to say here is, just, quit and get another job. But, that might or might not be a smart decision for you in this situation. The thing that would concern me most about this, I mean, a number of things concern me about this, but the thing that would concern me the most, the first question that I would ask is why are the numbers being gamed, and who is benefiting from that gaming of the numbers, and in what way? Because if the numbers are being gamed to hit some particular target or another in order to obtain a bonus, especially if this is some sort of contractual situation, there's a potential that you're being asked to help perpetrate a fraud. So, the question of, am I involved in behavior that is potentially illegal is one that might be worth asking, because if it is, then, the what to do changes. Now, let's assume that you've answered that question. The answer is no. It's not illegal. It's just stupid. Because not everything that's stupid is illegal. So let's suppose, it's not illegal. It's just dumb. That at some point you have to sort of assume that this game is going to come to an end, and I'd be a little bit worried about, am I going to be hung out to dry when it does? So you'd want to be careful that you were adequately covered on that. And you said you had this in writing, so I suppose they can't really complain. But you never know. It sounds like a really undesirable situation, and I certainly, above and beyond the anger part of it, it sounds like there could be some risky pieces for you. So, the best thing would be to be somewhere where that wasn't happening. So Levi says, Rex, being the expert that you are, thank you for that. Was there a worse practice that you had followed in the past for the longest time before learning from another colleague a better way to go about that practice? I didn't cover it this time, or I don't think I did last time either. But years and years ago, I was under the assumption that the best tests were always automated, and that one should try to focus on having as close to 100% of your tests automated. And this is another one of those unidimensional test basis problems. It's similar to the, covering the requirements is everything kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff that simply can't be tested in an automated fashion, or shouldn't be tested in an automated fashion, and that doesn't mean that it's not valuable to test it. And the way I learned the error of my ways was that I was informed by the tech support people in no uncertain terms that they were not at all pleased with what we were doing in testing because of all the things that we were missing. And I looked at the things we were missing. I was like, oh, well, those really aren't automatable tests, and so that's why we're not covering it. So I was lucky enough to be able to communicate with my key stakeholder, one of my key stakeholders, in this case, the tech support folks, to get that information. So that was the best practice part. But, I had been making that unidimensional coverage mistake. So I'd say that's probably one that stung me quite a bit. Let's see. So Griffin has a comment here. Says, regarding gaming metrics, quote from James Bullock, testing produces information reliably grounded in the observed behavior of a system. Observation is what separates testing from analysis, induction, deduction, and speculation. Anytime you argue yourself out of an observation because what you see just doesn't make sense or create circumstances that corrupt the observing, you are defeating the purpose of testing. And this is the big book of how to do perfect testing. That title had to have been written tongue in cheek. So that's by Bullock. So then continuing on with that quote, so testing is an informational function. You are paying to learn something. Anytime you bury or misinterpret information you get from testing, you're corrupting what you're paying for. Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean that's perfectly true. It's just pointless. You're paying to get information and to learn things, and then if you're going to say, well, we're going to game the numbers, it's like, okay, good work, destroying the value of the testing that you're doing. Let's see another quote here from Bullock via Griffin. Information is valuable if you act on it, otherwise it is entertainment. Each bit of information produced by testing needs a customer, a willing, enthusiastic customer eager to use the information they hope to get from testing to do a better job. Yep. One of the questions that I ask when I'm doing assessments for people outside of testing is, do you understand the test results that are being reported to you, and does your understanding of those test results help you to do your job better? And it is dismayingly common to be told, no, I don't understand the test results, and therefore they don't help me do my job better. Or, yes, I do understand them, but no, they don't help me do my job better. It's irrelevant information to me. So that's a good question to ask as a test manager. Identify your stakeholders, your external stakeholders, and ask them if they understand the test results and if that is information that they actually need to do their job. Aaron says, on the topic of Anonymous's question, do some organizations maintain internal and customer-facing bug lists? And if so, why? I would say that's fairly common for software development organizations to not release their bug information to the general public, that they will go through and come up with a list of some of the deferred bugs, and that will be released. But just throwing open your bug tracking information to the general public, I'm not aware of any software development company that does that. In fact, so I would say, yeah, the companies that develop software that they are going to sell to mass market or enterprise software, they would tend to have two separate lists. Yeah. Where the customer-facing list is a small subset of the larger list. Now, if you're doing custom development, then there could certainly be some ethical issues associated with that. And one of the things that I look for when I'm looking at contracts that organizations have with outsourced development teams and outsourced development organizations. So, do you have a right to audit the test results? Unfortunately, a lot of clients don't think to put that in there. You really want that in the contract. You want to have access to the test cases, the bug reports, everything. But if that's not in there in the contract, it's a pretty safe bet that the organization won't give you that list. You could say, well, they're withholding information, but if you didn't put it in the contract, say you have access to it, guess what? You're probably not going to get access to it. Let's see. Leone says, would you say agile development practices potentially promote the misconception that automated testing is the best way to test? I learned that automated testing is a standard required by agile development. What I would say is that I have seen amongst developers following agile practices a excessively optimistic belief in the amount, the defect detection effectiveness of those automated tests, and that this is particularly prevalent with organizations that are doing test-driven development. Because that's sort of the gospel that has been preached about test-driven development by some of the promoters of it is, we create these automated tests, these automated unit tests, and then we can just refactor, basically change the code at will and have 100% confidence that we're not going to introduce any regression when we do that because the tests still pass. Unit testing at its most effective tops out at about 50% defect detection effectiveness. Typical unit testing is more like 25%. Poor quality unit testing is around 10%. So, even assuming that your developers are doing a fantastic job of unit testing, they're going to be missing about 50% of the bugs, and that would include the regression bugs. So, that's a problem. Anytime people are starting to think of any form of testing, including automated unit tests, as a shield rather than a filter, then bad things are about to happen. And to clarify that, Griffin asked, the unit testing numbers are yours or Capers Jones's? Not disagreeing. They are Capers Jones unit test numbers, and they are consistent with what I tend to see in looking with working with clients. So I've got a kind of a sanity check of those in the sense of my observations are consistent with that. Griffin says, thanks for the shield versus filter comment. Yeah, very, very important. Yeah, testing is a filter. It is never a shield. Aaron says, thanks for the webinar. The discussion afterward has been wide-ranging. Very good. Hopefully it will continue to promote discussions. That's one of the moving ideas behind this series of webinars was to challenge some beliefs and get people thinking, stimulate thought. Let's see. Donald says there are common standards or common statements about what is most beneficial to be automated or the best focus of automation. Do you have any words of experience on this or any contrarian views? Well, so the general rule of thumb that I have for automation is that if a test is going to require frequent human intervention to be automated, or it actually requires human judgment in the loop to interpret the results, it should not be automated. If a test is not disqualified for those two reasons and is a test which is going to be run many, many times, there is value, regression risk mitigating value in repeating that test, say, 20, 30, 50 times, and you can actually establish a business case for repeating it that shows that you're going to get a positive return on investment, and the cost of maintaining that test is going to be low relative to the value received, then you should consider automating it. So that would be kind of my general rule there. Let's see. Leone, oh no, I got that one. That was the TDD one. Michael says, thanks. Great webinar. Thank you for that. Excuse me. Let's see. Rodrigo says, I found the defect tracking and lessons learned piece very interesting. I'm thinking this would be a great information tool for my team, but I'm curious on what would be an effective strategy for using it. Would you say it's better to have conversations meetings where the team gathers to review these, or just a repository of documents that the team can consult whenever necessary? So what I would say is you want to set up your defect tracking system in such a way that you've got useful classifications, things like root causes and meaningful priority and severity classifications, and look at do some reading on classification information for defects. Set up your system in such a way that you're capturing useful classification information. Train everybody in how to properly select the classifications, and this is very important. If you don't do this, you will get noise. Train people in how to properly select classifications. Make sure that there are no rewards or punishments associated with the selection of those classifications. Accumulate the data, and then use techniques like Pareto analysis to look for patterns in the defects that allow you to identify, say, what are the 2 or 3 most prevalent root causes of defects, and how could we go after those kind of defects more effectively in testing, as well as how could the developers avoid introducing the defects. Just simply pouring through large numbers of defect reports it's going to be a lot of trees and not a lot of forest coming out of that. So you want to use techniques like Pareto analysis to gain some insight. Okay. Mary says, not a question, just wanted to say thanks. I've learned so much from your webinars. Well, thank you for that. Okay. So we have hit that time. Do appreciate all of your comments and questions. We close this session out a little bit more about our resources. Remember, the free webinars are once a month. Sign up at our website, rbcs-us.com. If you want us to run a webinar in your company, send an email, contact us via your website, say, hey, we would like to have Rex do a webinar presentation, and we're happy to do one for your company. Of course, if you want people to listen to this webinar, just wait. In about 3 days or so, it'll be posted, and you can then go out and watch the recorded one. If you don't get our regular free newsletter, sign up at rbcs-us.com. This will get you valuable discounts on consulting and training services, and a regular every other month newsletter with a featured article on software testing and quality and news about what we are up to. I'm on RBCS is on Twitter at RBCS, and I've also added Like a Test Dog, which is me. So I'm kind of taking a small break from Twitter for the moment, but I'll be back on, and I get back into the real habit of work here by the end of this week. We're also on Facebook. That's RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email over the next couple of days, because you could be the lucky winner of the free e-learning course. You were registered simply by attending. As I said, these recorded webinars, along with other videos and so forth, are available out on the digital library, so go take a look at that. And you can also subscribe to the RBCS channel on YouTube, and the webinars are posted there. So we offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community, because at RBCS, we are a not-just-for-profit company. That concludes the webinar, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Look forward to hearing you and seeing you on future webinars.